Now that your husband is gone, you should start packing. Jake says we can't afford extra mouths to feed, my daughter said, her tone clipped, like she was discussing the weather. My fork froze midair. The roast chicken on my plate suddenly tasted like dust. Across the table, my son-in-law didn't even look at me, just kept scrolling through his phone. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence that followed. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply nodded, stood up, and walked to my room. I folded my clothes, placed them neatly into the same worn suitcase I'd used on my honeymoon 45 years ago, and by the time the clock hit 9, I was gone. No tears, no goodbyes, only the faint smell of rosemary from the dinner I'd cooked lingering in the air behind me. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The night air was sharp as I stepped outside. My breath came out in little clouds that disappeared into the dark. Their porch light flickered once before shutting off completely. I walked down the driveway, my suitcase wheels rattling over the cracked concrete. The same driveway where I had once taught my daughter to ride a bike, running behind her as she laughed and begged me not to let go. Now I was the one being let go. The small apartment I found that night wasn't much, just one room above a laundromat on Maple Avenue. The stairs creaked, the carpet smelled faint of detergent and age, but the landlord didn't ask questions. I handed him cash, he handed me the key, and that was that. When I closed the door, the silence was heavy, but at least it was mine. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. My hands trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion. The word burden kept echoing in my head. My daughter's husband had said it first months ago when I offered to help pay a bill. "You've done enough, Mary," he'd said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We can handle our finances without extra mouths to feed." I'd laughed it off then, but tonight those words had come back like a verdict. The following morning, I walked to the grocery store 2 blocks away. The chill of early spring nipped at my cheeks. I bought a loaf of bread, a small carton of milk, and instant coffee. $24.70. I paid in singles. The cashier, a young man with earbuds dangling from his hoodie, barely glanced up. As I stepped outside, I realized I hadn't spoken a full sentence to anyone since the night before. Back at the apartment, I opened my suitcase. Inside were fragments of another life. A framed photo of my late husband Harold holding our newborn daughter. A recipe card stained with gravy and the house key I no longer had a door for. I placed them carefully on the windowsill. It had been 3 months since Harold passed. I'd spent those weeks trying to keep our family together, cooking dinners, helping with their bills, babysitting when they needed time off. I thought grief had softened all of us. I thought losing him would make us hold tighter to what was left. Instead, it made them see me as dead weight. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum of the dryers below vibrated through the floor. I lay awake thinking about Harold, about his promise. "You'll always have a home, Mary, no matter what happens." I smiled bitterly in the dark. Promises fade faster than fresh paint. Still, beneath the ache, something small began to stir, something stubborn. I wasn't ready to disappear into silence. Not yet. I had worked 40 years as a school secretary. I'd paid off every debt, raised a family, buried a husband. I knew how to survive. And as I looked out the narrow window at the city lights, I realized I wasn't finished writing my story. I made a cup of instant coffee, bitter and thin, and took a sip. 3 months, I whispered to my reflection in the dark glass. Let's see what I can do in 3 months. I didn't know then that in exactly 90 days, I would be signing papers at a downtown office, buying the very building my daughter and her husband lived in. But for now, I only had my suitcase, my memories, and a quiet promise to myself they would never call me an extra mouth again. The next morning, the city woke early around me. The steady hum of delivery trucks and car horns filtered through the thin window panes of my tiny apartment. I sat at the small table by the window, sipping coffee that tasted faintly of cardboard, and watched people hurry down the sidewalk with purpose. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere, except me. The laundromat below rattled to life, machines spinning, coins clinking in the metal trays. The scent of detergent drifted up through the floorboards. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and tried to remember the last time someone had said my name with warmth. 3 weeks had passed since my daughter told me to leave. I hadn't heard from her once. No calls, no texts, not even to ask if I'd found a place. I told myself it didn't matter, but at 72, silence cuts deeper than words. I filled my mornings with small rituals. I cleaned the same table twice a day, rearranged the 2 photos I'd brought, one of Harold, one of my daughter when she was little, and read the classifieds even though I wasn't looking for work. Routine was the only thing keeping the walls from closing in. At noon, I walked to the small park nearby. The benches were cold metal, and the fountain hadn't been turned on since winter, but the air was clear. I sat under a bare maple tree, feeding crumbs of stale bread to the pigeons. They fluttered around me fearlessly, as if they knew I was harmless. 2 women sat on the next bench, talking loudly about rent going up again. $300 more a month, one of them groaned. This whole city's being bought up by investors. The word lingered in my mind. Investors. That evening, I went through the small box of papers I'd brought with me. Old bank statements, Harold's pension information, the modest life insurance policy we'd taken out decades ago. Numbers written in his neat, careful handwriting. It wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing either. When Harold was alive, he used to balance the checkbook at the kitchen counter every Sunday. I'd tease him for being old-fashioned. "One day you'll thank me for knowing where every penny goes," he'd reply. I smiled, remembering that. He was right. I found a business card tucked inside an old folder. Martin and Lowe Realty, residential and commercial properties. I remembered the name. Martin was the agent who helped Harold sell his father's land years ago. I turned the card over in my hand, feeling the edges worn soft with time. The next day I called. His assistant answered, cheerful but rushed. "Martin's semi-retired," she said, "but he still sees a few clients by appointment." I booked one for Friday morning. That night, I lay awake listening to the dryers below. I wasn't sure what I expected from the meeting. Maybe advice, maybe just a conversation that didn't begin and end with pity. But deep down, something had shifted. The silence that used to suffocate me was starting to sound like space. On Friday, I wore my gray wool coat and the pearl earrings Harold gave me for our 30th anniversary. The office was in a narrow brick building downtown. Martin looked older but not frail, with silver hair and kind eyes that lit up when he recognized me. "Mary," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "It's been, 20 years?" "Closer to 25, I smiled. "You sold Harold's father's land back in '99. He nodded. "Good man, your Harold, always meticulous." We talked about Harold for a while, the way you do when grief becomes a memory instead of a wound. Then I handed him the folder of papers. "I'm not sure if there's anything left worth looking into," I said. "But I need to know where I stand." He adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages. "Well," he said slowly, "you've got more options than you think." He pointed to a line in the paperwork, a forgotten investment Harold had made in a small construction company that had recently been bought out. "They're paying dividends. It's not huge, but it's steady. You could do something with this." "Something?" I asked. "Real estate," he said simply. "Small properties, apartments. It's a seller's market right now, but for someone patient, someone who knows value, you could turn this into security." Security. The word landed softly but firmly in my chest. That night, I cooked myself a real meal for the first time in weeks. Pan-fried chicken with mashed potatoes. The smell filled the small apartment, familiar and comforting. I set one place at the table but poured 2 glasses of water out of habit. Old reflexes die hard. As I ate, I thought about my daughter's dining table, the one Harold and I had given her as a wedding gift. I wondered if she'd sat there tonight, maybe across from her husband, maybe in the same silence I'd left behind. When the dishes were done, I looked at the envelope Martin had given me. Inside were documents, ownership reports, projected returns, and a list of properties currently for sale. One address caught my eye, 203 Maple Street. My heart skipped. That was the building where my daughter lived. I read the listing twice, then folded the paper neatly and slipped it into my drawer. The hum of the dryers downstairs steadied my heartbeat. I didn't know what would happen yet, but I knew this. For the first time in months, I felt awake. The pity, the loneliness, even the humiliation, they were turning into something sharper. Purpose. I looked out the window at the flickering streetlight and whispered, Harold, I think I just found my next Sunday project. The following week, I visited the bank. The marble floor gleamed. The air smelled faintly of paper and polish. I waited in line behind a young couple talking about vacation plans to Florida. When it was my turn, I handed the clerk my documents. My voice didn't shake this time. I'd like to withdraw a portion of my account and move the rest into a certificate of deposit, I said. She smiled politely, tapping on her keyboard. To her, it was routine. To me, it was the first decision I'd made for myself in months. Back at the apartment, I spread the paperwork on the table. Property listings, payment schedules, legal terms I had underlined twice to make sure I understood. The hum of the dryers below felt almost like a rhythm now, keeping time with my heartbeat. I made lists, columns of numbers, questions, options. Harold would have been proud. Every night, I walked past the building on Maple Street. Their building. The lights from their apartment glowed behind the second-floor window. I could see silhouettes, my daughter moving from room to room, her husband pacing with a phone pressed to his ear. Once, I saw them laughing at something on the television. For a second, I stopped walking, the cold air catching in my throat. Then I kept going. 2 weeks later, I met with Martin again. He'd reviewed the details and was straightforward. If you're serious about buying this building, he said, I can make an offer through a holding company. It'll keep your name off the paperwork. That's possible? I asked. He nodded. Completely legal. A little anonymity can be useful. I looked at the file, at the address typed neatly on the top. 203 Maple Street. My hands rested on the edge of the table. Let's do it. He smiled, maybe surprised, maybe impressed. All right, Mary, you'll need patience. Deals like this take time. I've been patient for 72 years. I said quietly. That night, I sat by the window, the city lights reflecting off the glass. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt focused. Every humiliation, every quiet dinner alone, every moment they made me feel like an extra mouth. They were all pieces of a puzzle that was finally coming together. A month passed. I received the call on a Tuesday morning. Congratulations, Martin said. The sale went through. I didn't answer right away. My fingers brushed the edge of the kitchen table, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my skin. So it's done, I said finally. It's done, he confirmed. You're the owner of 203 Maple Street. After we hung up, I sat in silence. I expected joy, maybe triumph, but what I felt was something calmer. Relief, maybe. The sound of the dryers downstairs faded, replaced by the steady tick of my clock. That afternoon, I walked by the building again, this time slower. The front steps needed painting. The mailbox was crooked. The landlord before me hadn't cared for the place. I did. A week later, I mailed new lease agreements to all tenants. Clean, professional envelope stamped notice of property management update. The rent increase was modest for most, except for one unit, apartment 2B, my daughter's. The new rate was exactly triple. 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message came through minutes later. Mom, it's me. A pause, a nervous breath. We just got this letter about the rent. It must be a mistake. Can you call me back? I didn't. Instead, I brewed tea and sat by the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. I thought about all the nights I'd sat here feeling invisible. Now, every light on that block existed under my name. Later that week, I went to the property office to sign the final management papers. The clerk, a young woman with bright red nails, handed me a folder. Here's the full tenant list, Mrs. Sanders, she said. You can decide how you'd like rent payments handled. I nodded, flipping through the pages. My daughter's name appeared halfway down the list. Seeing it printed there, under mine, brought a quiet satisfaction no revenge could match. That evening, as I walked home, the sky was the color of steel, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain. I passed the grocery store where I used to shop with my daughter when she was little. She'd always sneak candy into the cart, grinning when I pretended not to notice. The memory stung, but it didn't break me anymore. When I reached my apartment, I turned on the radio, letting an old Sinatra song fill the room. I set my cup of tea beside the window and whispered, "We're even now, Harold." The phone buzzed again. Another message, another apology left unread. I didn't need to listen. The point wasn't revenge. It was clarity. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. I woke early the next morning to the sound of rain against the window. The city always looked softer in the rain. The noise dampened, the sidewalks washed clean. I made coffee and stood watching drops slide down the glass, tracing uneven paths to the sill. My phone blinked again. Another missed call from my daughter. The voicemail icon glowed red, but I didn't touch it. I let it stay there, like a reminder that some doors didn't need reopening. Later, I opened the ledger where I kept notes about the property. Rent collection dates, maintenance requests, receipts. The tenants in 1A and 3C had paid on time. The envelope for 2B was still missing. I wrote a small note beside it. Grace period 7 days. Then I closed the book. Around noon, I went out for groceries. The air smelled of wet pavement and coffee grounds. At the corner store, the clerk handed me my usual paper bag, bread, eggs, and a small carton of milk. "Rain's supposed to stop by evening," he said casually. I nodded and smiled. Ordinary conversation felt good. It reminded me I was still part of the world. As I walked back, I passed their building, my building. Through the mist, I could see my daughter standing by the front door with her phone pressed to her ear. She looked worried, pacing. For a second, I wanted to cross the street to tell her to come inside, to make her a cup of tea. Then I remembered her words from that night. "We can't afford extra mouths to feed," and the moment passed. I turned the corner and kept walking. That night, I cooked a small dinner, just enough for one. The light flickered in the kitchen, and the smell of fried onions filled the air. I sat down at the table and unfolded the newspaper. In the finance section, there was an article about women over 60 managing investments on their own. The headline read, "Late Bloomers in Real Estate." I smiled to myself. Maybe I belonged in that group now. When Friday came, a knock sounded at my door. It was Martin. He held a thin envelope and a folder under his arm. "Thought I'd bring this by in person," he said. "All tenants have acknowledged the new terms except one." I didn't need to ask which one. He placed the folder on the table. "They sent a note asking for an extension. They're behind on other bills, it seems." I ran my fingers along the edge of the envelope, feeling the paper's roughness. "How much time do they have?" "Technically another week," he replied gently. "But it's your call." I nodded. "Let it be a week then, no more." When he left, the apartment felt quiet again, the kind of quiet that fills your lungs until it hurts. I sat for a long time staring at the rain-streaked window, thinking about how strange love becomes when mixed with disappointment. 2 days later, another envelope arrived, this one from 2B. Inside was a check for the full amount and a short note written in my daughter's familiar handwriting. "Please, Mom, can we talk?" I turned the paper over, reading the same line again and again. There was no anger in it, only something tired. I set the note down beside my cup of coffee and watched the ink bleed slightly from a small drop of water that had fallen from my hand. That evening, I walked to the park. The sky was clearing, streaks of orange breaking through gray clouds. Children ran through puddles, their laughter echoing off the benches. I sat down under the same maple tree as before. The pigeons gathered again, bold and curious. One hopped onto my shoe, pecking gently at a crumb. I thought of my daughter as a child, her pigtails bouncing as she chased pigeons around this very park. Harold laughing behind us, pretending to scold her for scaring them off. The memory came so vividly that for a moment I forgot where I was. Then I took a deep breath and let it drift away, the same way the pigeons eventually flew off when the crumbs were gone. Back home, the apartment felt smaller but warmer somehow. I made tea, the kind Harold used to drink before bed. As the kettle whistled, I caught my reflection in the dark window. Older, yes, but steady. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't an extra mouth. I was a woman who had built something again from nothing. The next morning, I placed the note from my daughter into a small tin box with other keepsakes, Harold's old pocket watch, our wedding photo, a pressed flower from my garden years ago. I didn't throw it away. Some things deserve to be kept, even if only to remember how far you've come. When the rent payments cleared that week, I entered the amount neatly into the ledger. The check from 2B looked just like all the others. No special markings, no weight beyond its numbers. Yet as I closed the book, I realized the balance had shifted. Not on paper, but inside me. I turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow from the street outside. The city was quiet, but for once, I didn't mind the silence. It felt earned. A week later, I received a knock on my door just as I was watering the small fern by the window. The rhythm of it was hesitant. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. I knew that knock. My heart thudded once, steady and slow. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. My daughter stood there, her eyes rimmed red, her coat damp from the morning drizzle. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt thick, almost fragile. "Mom," she said softly, voice breaking at the edges. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. She entered, glancing around the tiny apartment like it was foreign territory. It probably was. She hadn't seen how I lived now. No family photos on every wall, no smell of roast dinners lingering in the air, just quiet and order. She sat down at the table, folding her hands. "I didn't know it was you," she began. "The new landlord. The rent. The letters. Jake thought it was some investor." I poured her a cup of tea and placed it in front of her. "Does it matter who it is?" She looked down. "No," she admitted, "but it matters to me." For the first time, I saw the exhaustion in her face, not the sharp arrogance I remembered from that dinner table, but something softer. Defeated, maybe. "Things haven't been easy," she said. "Jake's hours got cut. We've been struggling to keep up." I sipped my tea slowly, letting her words hang there. "When I lived with you," I said quietly, "I cooked, cleaned, and watched the kids. I never asked for anything. Still, you called me an extra mouth to feed." She flinched, tears gathering in her eyes. "I know, I was wrong. I said what he wanted to hear. That doesn't make it better." She nodded, staring at the table. "I didn't come to ask for pity," she said finally. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." We sat in silence for a while. The rain outside softened to a drizzle. Somewhere below, the dryers in the laundromat hummed, steady as always. "Do you love him?" I asked suddenly. Her eyes widened. "Jake? Yes," she hesitated. "I used to. I think I still do, but it's different now. I guess love feels heavier when you're scared." I nodded. "It does." She looked up, searching my face. "Will you sell the building?" "No," I said simply, "but I'll lower your rent to what it was before." Her lips trembled. "Why?" "Because you're my daughter," I said, standing, "and because I'm not him. I won't make someone beg for a place to stay." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Mom, I don't deserve that." "Maybe not," I said softly, "but it's what you'll get." When she left, she hugged me, not a polite embrace, but a full one, the kind that shakes a little, like the body's trying to remember how to let go. "Thank you," she whispered. After she was gone, the apartment felt heavier, filled with the scent of wet wool and black tea. I sat back down and looked at her empty cup, the ring of tea left behind, marking the table like a small eclipse. That evening, I walked past the building again. The lights in 2B were on. Through the window, I saw her moving about the kitchen, cleaning, cooking, simple, ordinary motions. Jake sat at the table, face buried in his hands. I didn't linger. I just looked once, long enough to feel the ache loosen inside my chest. Then I turned away. On the way home, I stopped by the bakery. The young woman behind the counter smiled and asked if I wanted my usual 2 butter rolls and a small black coffee. "Add 1 more roll," I said. When I got back to my apartment, I placed the extra roll on a small plate and set it beside Harold's photo. "You'd laugh if you saw me now," I murmured. "A landlord at 72. Who would have thought?" The city outside was quiet, streetlights reflecting off puddles. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the low hum of traffic. Somewhere in that sound was peace. Not triumph, not revenge, just peace. The next morning, I checked my mail. A single envelope waited inside. It was from 2B. Inside was a check for the new rent amount, along with a note written in familiar handwriting. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my ledger between the pages marked paid. Then I took my coffee to the window and watched the sun rise over the city. For the first time in a long time, I felt something warm settled deep in my chest. Not victory, not forgiveness, something steadier. The quiet knowledge that I had survived every version of loss and come out whole. I closed the ledger, whispering to the empty room, "I'm not an extra mouth. I'm the one who built the table." A few weeks passed quietly. The rhythm of my days settled into something steady again. Morning coffee, short walks, calls from tenants about small repairs. Life had become predictable, calm. I didn't hear from my daughter for a while, but the rent arrived on time every month. Sometimes her checks came with neat notes, short, polite lines like, "Thank you for your patience," or "Maintenance in the hallway light fixed." Nothing emotional, nothing fragile, but I read every word carefully, as if each one carried a trace of her voice. One afternoon, as I was returning from the post office, I saw her standing outside the bakery. She was holding a paper bag and talking to the woman behind the counter. When she spotted me, she smiled. A real smile this time. Not the hesitant one I'd seen during her visit, but warm and open. She waved. I hesitated before lifting my hand in return. She crossed the street toward me, her hair windblown, cheeks flushed. "Mom," she said, slightly out of breath, "I was hoping I'd run into you." We stood there in the sunlight, surrounded by the smell of bread and the sound of traffic. "I wanted to tell you," she went on. "Jake moved out. It's been coming for a while. I just didn't know how to say it." I looked at her face. There was sadness there, yes, but also a kind of relief, as if she'd been holding her breath for years and finally exhaled. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. She shook her head. "Don't be. It's better this way. The kids are with me. We're figuring things out." There was a pause. "I know I have no right to ask," she said, "but would you like to come over for dinner sometime? The kids would love to see you." For a moment, I didn't answer. The invitation hung between us, fragile as glass. I thought of the first night I'd eaten alone in that tiny apartment, of the silence that had filled the room like smoke. And now, standing here in the spring light, it felt like the world had shifted slightly back into place. "I'd like that," I said finally. She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. "Sunday?" "Sunday," I repeated. That evening, I came home and sat by the window. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, and the city hummed below me. I took out Harold's photo and placed it beside my cup of tea. "You'd laugh at me, Harold," I whispered. "All this trouble just to get invited to dinner again." Sunday came faster than I expected. I dressed carefully. A navy cardigan, silver earrings, a touch of perfume I hadn't worn in years. When I reached the building, she opened the door before I could knock. The kids ran to me, their laughter filling the hallway. "Grandma!" they shouted, clinging to my legs. I knelt, hugging them tightly, breathing in the scent of soap and crayons. The apartment looked different, warmer. A new rug in the living room, plants by the window, family photos back on the walls. She led me to the kitchen. The table was set neatly, 3 plates, silverware polished, candles unlit. "I made pot roast," she said, smiling nervously. "I remembered it's your favorite." I laughed softly. "It used to be Harold's favorite. I just made it because he loved it." We ate together, and for a long time, no one spoke. The sound of forks against plates was the only noise. Then she said quietly, "I didn't realize how much I missed this." "Dinner with family?" I asked. She nodded. "Dinner without fear." After dinner, I helped her wash the dishes. The children played in the living room, their laughter drifting in like sunlight through the curtains. She handed me a towel to dry the plates. "I wanted to ask," she said, "do you think we could start over?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Starting over doesn't mean forgetting," I said gently. "It means learning from where we broke." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "Then I'm ready to learn." When I left that night, she walked me downstairs. The air was cool and quiet, the street lamps glowing faintly. Before I reached the door, she stopped me. "Mom," she said softly, "thank you for not giving up on me." I touched her cheek. "Mothers don't give up," I said. "We wait." She hugged me again, longer this time. Then she went back upstairs, and I stood there for a moment, looking up at the window glowing softly with light. Back in my apartment, I placed the leftover piece of pot roast in the fridge, smiling at the absurdity of it all. For months, I'd eaten alone, in silence. Now, there was laughter echoing in my mind, the sound of plates clinking, the smell of dinner filling the air. I sat by the window, sipping tea. The phone buzzed once, a message from my daughter. "Home safe?" it read. "Yes," I replied. "Thank you for dinner." A pause. Then her message came. "I love you, Mom." I stared at the screen, the words simple and unadorned. My hands trembled slightly as I typed back, "I love you too." Outside, the city lights shimmered, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. Spring turned into summer quietly. The city seemed brighter, the mornings longer. I started spending more time at my daughter's apartment, helping her with the children when she worked late. It felt strange at first. stepping into the same building that had once shut its door on me. But the air inside was lighter now, different. The anger that used to hang between us like smoke had thinned. What remained was something quieter, something human. One afternoon, I brought a basket of groceries to her place. She was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, stirring sauce on the stove. The children were coloring at the table, giggling softly. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching. The scene looked almost ordinary, but for me, it was everything. "Smells good," I said finally. She turned and smiled. "Tomato and basil. I learned from the best." "Your father would have argued that his version was better," I said, laughing softly. We ate together, sunlight pouring through the window. Between bites, she told me about her new job at a local clinic. "It's not much," she said, "but it's steady." "It's enough," I told her. "Steady is good." After lunch, while she washed dishes, I helped the children tidy their toys. "Grandma," the little one said suddenly, "Mommy said you own our house. Is that true?" I looked at her small face so open and trusting. "I suppose it is," I said gently. "But I think it belongs to all of us now." Later that evening, as I left, my daughter followed me to the door. "You've been coming by a lot lately," she said, smiling. "Feels like you're moving back in." "Don't tempt me," I teased. "This place has enough mouths to feed already." She laughed, but I saw her eyes soften. She reached for my hand. "You're not an extra mouth, Mom. You never were." Her voice broke a little at the end, and I squeezed her hand before pulling away. "I know," I said simply. "It just took you a while to see it." Walking home that evening, I passed by the old grocery store, the park, and finally my own building. The city lights shimmered on the pavement, and somewhere a radio played an old jazz tune. I carried a paper bag with leftover sauce, the warmth seeping through to my palms. When I got home, the air was still and cool. I placed the bag on the counter and sat by the window. Across the street, the light from their apartment was still on. I could see the silhouettes of the children running around, my daughter laughing as she chased them. The sound didn't reach me, but I could feel it all the same. The next morning, I received a letter from the property management office. It was a formal notice, an offer from another buyer interested in purchasing the building. The amount was generous. I held the paper in my hands for a long time, thinking about everything that address meant. The pain, the distance, the lessons. I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer without replying. Some things were worth more than money. Weeks went by, each one softer than the last. My daughter began calling me every evening. Sometimes we talked about the children, sometimes just about nothing at all. I'd sit with a cup of tea, listening to her voice, letting it fill the quiet corners of my apartment. One Friday, she called sounding breathless. "Mom, I got promoted," she said. "Head nurse for the pediatric wing." I smiled, pride swelling quietly inside me. "See what happens when you stop listening to the wrong voices?" She laughed. "You mean Jake?" "I didn't say that," I replied, but we both knew. That weekend, we celebrated with a small dinner at her place. She cooked roast chicken just like I used to. When she brought it to the table, she said, "I finally got it right this time." I tasted it carefully. "Almost," I said. "Needs more salt." She rolled her eyes, laughing. "You'll never give me full marks, will you?" "Not until you stop burning the onions," I said. The children burst out laughing, and soon all of us were smiling. The table, once the center of so much silence and shame, was alive again. I caught my daughter's gaze across the table, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The forgiveness between us didn't need words. It lived in the shared laughter, the passing of dishes, the clinking of glasses. After dinner, she walked me downstairs as she always did. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the garden. "You sure you don't want to move closer?" she asked. "It'd be easier." "I'm close enough," I said. "Besides, if I move in, who'll collect the rent?" She laughed, hugging me tightly. "You're impossible." As I walked home under the streetlights, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Not triumph, not victory, just peace that came from surviving everything and still being able to love. When I reached my apartment, I poured myself a glass of water and looked out the window one last time. Their lights were off now, the building quiet, safe, steady. I smiled faintly. For the first time, I wasn't looking at the place as a landlord or a mother left behind. I was just a woman who had built something lasting from what was once broken. I whispered to the night, "Harold, I think we did all right." Then I turned off the light and let the quiet wrap around me like a blanket. By the time autumn came, the trees along Maple Street had turned gold. Every morning, I walked past the building and watched the leaves collect at the curb, swept into quiet piles by the wind. The city always felt softer in fall, like it was exhaling after holding its breath all summer. One chilly morning, my daughter called. "Mom, can you come by later? The kids want to show you something." I laughed. "If it's another science project that explodes, I'm bringing goggles this time." "No explosions," she promised, "just dinner." That evening, I carried a basket of apples I'd bought from the market. The building smelled of cinnamon and something roasting. When she opened the door, the warmth hit me, the kind of warmth that comes from both heat and love. The children were setting the table, arguing over napkins. "Grandma," they shouted when they saw me. "Look what we made." They held up a crayon drawing. Our family, standing in front of the building, smiling. I took it carefully, my eyes catching on the words written in uneven letters at the bottom. Home. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's beautiful," I said. "Can I keep it?" "No," the little one said proudly. "We're hanging it here." They taped it to the fridge while my daughter smiled quietly from across the room. Dinner was simple, pot roast again, with mashed potatoes and rolls. The kind of meal that feels like memory. Halfway through, my daughter poured me tea and said, "You know, Mom, the tenants keep saying how much nicer the building feels now. Even the lady in 3C said she's never had a landlord check on her like you do." I smiled. "It's easier to care for a place when it's more than just walls." She nodded. "You've done more than fix the building. You fixed us." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. After dinner, I helped her with the dishes. The children played in the living room, their laughter echoing off the walls. For the first time, I realized the sound didn't hurt anymore. It filled the spaces that used to ache. When I was about to leave, my daughter handed me a small envelope. "Before you go," she said, "the kids and I made this." Inside was a card, hand-painted and lopsided. It read, "Thank you for giving us a home. Love all of us." I ran my finger over the words, the uneven brushstrokes, the tiny fingerprints in the corner. "You didn't have to," I said softly. "I did," she said, "because you taught me that a home isn't something you inherit, it's something you build back." I hugged her then, longer than before. There were no tears, just the quiet rhythm of two hearts finding the same beat again. On my walk home, the air was crisp. I stopped in front of the building and looked up at their window. The light glowed faintly, the kind of light that told you everything inside was safe. The next morning, I went to the property office to file a notice. The clerk looked up. "Are you selling, Mrs. Sanders?" I shook my head. "No, I'm transferring ownership to my daughter." Her eyebrows lifted. "You're sure?" I smiled. "Completely." Back home, I made tea and sat by the window, the sunlight falling across the table. The papers were signed and sealed in a neat stack beside me. The building, the one that had once been a symbol of loss and pride, now belonged to her. It felt right. That afternoon, I visited the park. The maple tree was shedding its last few leaves, bare branches tracing lines against the sky. I sat on my usual bench, watching children play, couples walk, pigeons peck at the ground. Life kept moving, the way it always does. I took a deep breath, the air cool in my lungs, and smiled. There was no bitterness left, no unfinished anger, only gratitude. For lessons learned the hard way, for love that came back quietly, and for the strange, unexpected peace of growing old and still finding purpose. When I got home that evening, a note was waiting on my door. It was from my daughter. "We know what you did. Come over tomorrow. No arguments." I laughed, shaking my head. The handwriting looked rushed, joyful. The next day I went. She had cooked breakfast, pancakes, fruit, coffee. The table was crowded with the kids' chatter and sunlight. When I sat down, she placed a small key in my hand. "What's this?" I asked. "The spare key," she said, "so you never have to knock again." I looked at her, the key warm in my palm, and for the first time in years, the ache in my chest was gone. "I think," I said, smiling, "I'll hang it right by my door, just in case." She nodded. "Good, because you'll always have one here too." Later that night, I placed the key beside Harold's photo. The city outside glowed under the streetlights, soft and golden. I poured myself a cup of tea and whispered into the quiet, "We're home now. Harold finally home." Winter crept in quietly that year. The first frost covered the sidewalks, and the morning smelled like wood smoke and coffee. I'd taken to walking early, before the city woke. The streets were empty then, just the whisper of wind through bare trees. I liked the solitude. It felt earned. One morning, I stopped by the bakery. The woman behind the counter already knew my order. 2 butter rolls, 1 small black coffee. "Your daughter came in earlier," she said with a smile. "Bought all the apple tarts for her kids." I smiled. "She always loved those." "She said to tell you she'll be by later," the woman added. I nodded, folding the paper bag closed and tucking it under my arm. "I'll be home." Back at my apartment, I set the rolls on a plate and turned on the small radio by the window. Old jazz filled the room, the same kind Harold used to hum along to. The sound made the walls feel warmer. It wasn't long before there was a knock on the door. My daughter stood there, cheeks flushed from the cold, holding a thermos of cocoa and a bag of cookies. "We're decorating the tree tonight," she said, "and we're not starting without you." I laughed softly. "Is that an order?" "It's a family tradition," she said, smiling. "We missed too many already." I grabbed my coat and followed her back across the street. Inside the building, the hallway smelled faintly of pine. The kids had already started. Ornaments scattered on the floor, tangled lights blinking weakly. The littlest one was standing on a chair, trying to reach a branch that was too high. "Careful," I said, steadying the chair. "That's how I lost a star once." He grinned down at me. "Grandma, you can put the star on top." "An honor I'll take," I said, and they all clapped as I lifted the gold star to the tip of the tree. Afterward, we sat together on the couch, cocoa warming our hands. My daughter leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know," she said quietly, "last year at this time I thought I'd lost you forever." I took a sip of cocoa before answering. "You almost did." "I know," she whispered. "I was so angry back then. At myself, at everything. I thought I was doing what was right for my family, but I was wrong about what family means." I turned to look at her. "We all make mistakes," I said softly. "The trick is not staying in them." She smiled faintly. "You never let me stay in anything for long, even when I deserved it." "That's what mothers do," I said. "We wait, we hope, and when the time comes, we open the door again." The children started to drift off one by one, curled up in blankets near the tree. The lights flickered gently against the window, reflecting little halos of color on the glass. I watched them for a while, my heart quiet but full. When I finally stood to leave, my daughter walked me downstairs. The air outside was cold and still, the snow starting to fall again. She stopped at the door. "Mom," she said, "I never asked, why didn't you tell me you bought the building?" I looked up at the flakes drifting down from the sky. "Because you weren't ready to know," I said. "And maybe I wasn't ready to tell you. Sometimes love needs distance before it makes sense." She nodded slowly, tears glinting in the soft light. "I understand that now." I smiled. "Good, because I think your kids are going to need you to remember it someday." She laughed through her tears and hugged me. "You always know what to say." "Not always," I said, holding her tight. "But when I do, it's because Harold whispers it first." She pulled back, eyes shining. "You still talk to him?" "Every day," I said, "mostly to tell him we turned out fine." When I got home, I hung my coat by the door and sat by the window. The snow was falling thicker now, blanketing the street in soft white. Across the way, their tree glowed through the window, warm, alive, steady. I picked up the drawing the children had made months before, still hanging on my fridge. Home. The word didn't sting anymore. It soothed. I turned off the lights, letting the glow from across the street fill my apartment. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a heartbeat between 2 breaths. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We made it, Harold." Every broken thing found its way back. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, covering every crack the world once showed. The snow stayed for weeks, turning the city into a muted world of white and gray. Mornings began with the scrape of shovels and the hiss of car tires on slush. From my window, I watched people move through it all, bundled and bent against the cold. There was something comforting in the sameness of winter, everyone just trying to keep warm, to keep going. A few days after Christmas, I walked to my daughter's apartment carrying a tin of cookies. The hallway smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. When she opened the door, the smell of baking wrapped around me like a blanket. "You're early," she said, smiling. "The kids are still in pajamas." "I came to help clean up the post-holiday chaos," I said. She laughed, stepping aside. "Then you're brave." The living room was a small storm of wrapping paper, half-built toys, and glittering ribbon. The kids waved from the floor, too absorbed in their new puzzles to move. I set the cookie tin on the table. "Fuel for the troops," I said. We spent the morning together, sorting through boxes and folding cardboard. At one point, my daughter paused, holding a small ornament shaped like a heart. "Dad bought this the year I was born," she said. "He said it reminded him of how small my hands were." I nodded. He never missed a Christmas without hanging it first. She placed it gently back in the box, her eyes distant. "I hope I'm doing half as well with my own kids." "You're doing better," I said simply. The days after that blurred into a steady rhythm, short calls, visits, dinners. We'd become something steady again, something that felt like family. But life has a way of testing peace just when it settles. It happened one icy evening in late January. My phone rang around 7. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number. But something in me did. "Mrs. Sanders?" a voice said. "This is Officer Reeves. There's been a small accident near Maple and 3rd. Your daughter's been taken to St. Luke's. She's stable, but we thought you should come." The world went quiet. I didn't remember putting on my coat, only that the next moment I was outside, breath visible in the freezing air, boots slipping on ice as I hurried toward the hospital. When I reached her room, she was sitting up, a bruise blooming across her forehead, her arm wrapped in a sling. She smiled weakly. "Before you panic, it's just a sprain. Some guy ran a red light. The car's worse off than I am." I sank into the chair beside her, my knees weak with relief. "You could have called me yourself," I said softly. "I didn't want you to worry." "That's all I do," I said. "You're my daughter. Worry comes free with the title." She laughed, wincing a little. "Guess I can't argue with that." Later that night, after she was discharged, I took her home. The kids were asleep on the couch, their heads pressed together. The apartment was dim, except for the soft glow from the Christmas tree she hadn't yet taken down. She sat on the couch, rubbing her eyes. "I can't believe how fast things change," she murmured. "One minute you're fine, the next you're sitting in an ambulance wondering if you said I love you enough." I sat beside her. "You have time," I said. "Say it tomorrow and every day after." She leaned her head on my shoulder, quiet for a long time. "When I was in that ambulance," she said softly, "I kept thinking about you. How you walked out that night, how I let you. I still don't know how you forgave me." "I didn't," I said. "I just decided to love you more than the pain." Her breath hitched and she turned her face into my shoulder. "I don't deserve you." "Maybe not," I said, smiling faintly, "but you get me anyway." We stayed like that for a while, the soft hum of the heater filling the silence. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the world wrapped in white stillness. When I finally left that night, she walked me downstairs. The street was slick with ice, but the air had that strange warmth that comes after a storm, the kind that feels like a promise. She kissed my cheek. "Drive safe, okay?" "I'm walking," I said, "and don't you start telling me what to do now." She laughed, the sound cutting through the cold. Old habits. As I walked home, I looked up at the glowing windows of the building. Every light was a small, beating heart in the dark. I thought of Harold again, of how he used to say that life wasn't about avoiding the cold. It was about keeping the fire alive long enough to feel it. Back in my apartment, I sat down at the table and took out my ledger, the one where I'd once kept rent records and notes. Now I opened to a blank page. At the top, I wrote one line. "Love is not debt. It's investment." I closed the book and smiled to myself. The lights from across the street flickered faintly, and for the first time I realized the story wasn't ending. It was just settling, like snow, soft and sure, covering everything that had once been broken. The following weeks passed slower than I expected. My daughter's arm healed, but I still called her every morning just to hear her voice. Sometimes she laughed, teasing me for worrying too much. Sometimes she didn't answer right away, and I found myself staring at the phone until it rang back. Old habits are hard to break. One Sunday afternoon, she invited me over for dinner again. "No excuses," she said on the phone. "We're celebrating something." I arrived just before dusk. The table was already set, candles flickering in small glass jars. The children ran to the door the moment I knocked. "Grandma, Mommy cooked all by herself." I laughed, stepping inside. That's always worth celebrating. My daughter stood by the stove, stirring something that smelled like garlic and rosemary. She looked healthier now, brighter, more sure of herself. "You'll be proud of me," she said. "I didn't burn a single thing this time." "I'll be the judge of that," I replied, smiling. Dinner was simple: baked chicken, roasted potatoes, green beans, the kind of meal that doesn't need much to be perfect. We talked and laughed, the kids telling stories about school, her sharing bits of her day from the clinic. It all felt ordinary, which made it precious. After we finished eating, she poured us both tea. Her hands were steady now, not the shaky kind of careful they'd been months ago. "I've been thinking a lot," she said quietly, "about everything, about you." I waited, letting her find her words. "When you bought this building," she said, "I thought it was revenge. I told myself you did it to punish us, but now I understand you did it to teach me something." "What's that?" I asked softly. She smiled faintly. "That love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it has to hold you accountable." I nodded. "Love isn't a soft thing. It's steady. It doesn't disappear just because someone stops deserving it." She looked down at her tea. "You always were stronger than me." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "I wasn't stronger. I just had more time to learn." She squeezed my hand. "I don't know how to repay you." "You already have," I said. "You came back." Silence settled between us, comfortable and real, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. The kids were asleep before I left, curled up on the couch with their blankets. She walked me downstairs, the same as always. The night air was cold but calm, and the city was quiet except for the sound of snow melting in the gutters. At the front door, she stopped. "Mom, I've been saving some money. I want to buy the building back from you. It feels right." I looked at her, surprised but not shocked. "You think you're ready for that responsibility?" She nodded. "I do. I want to take care of it the way you did, the way Dad would have wanted." I smiled. "You already are, but if you want it in writing, we'll talk to the lawyer." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "You'll regret being a landlord by next winter." She laughed, brushing at her cheeks. "Maybe, but it'll be mine, ours." We stood there for a moment, neither of us wanting to leave. She hugged me tightly, her breath warm against my neck. "You taught me how to stand on my own," she whispered, "and how to forgive myself." I held her a little longer. Then I did something right. When I got home that night, I made myself tea and sat by the window. The snow had mostly melted, the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. Across the street, her apartment lights glowed soft and golden. On the table beside me lay the card the kids had made for Christmas, creased now at the edges but still bright. Home. I ran my fingers over the word and thought of all the versions of home I'd lost and rebuilt. The first one with Harold, the one I was forced out of. And this one, the quiet space where forgiveness finally took root. The radio played softly in the background, a slow tune from another lifetime. I hummed along, almost without realizing it. The next morning, my daughter called again. "Mom," she said, "the kids want you to come to the park this weekend. They're building snowmen." "I'll bring the carrots," I said. She laughed. "And scarves. They say your snowmen are always the best dressed." "I taught them well," I said. After the call ended, I stood by the window, watching the sunlight creep through the blinds. The city was waking up again. I thought of Harold, of how he used to kiss my hand and say, "One day, you'll see, everything circles back to love." He was right. It all had. I finished my tea, grabbed my coat, and opened the window slightly. Cold air rushed in, sharp and alive. Somewhere across the street, I could hear my daughter's laughter through the open window. It was enough. It was everything. Spring returned the way it always did, quietly, without asking permission. The frost melted from the rooftops, and the smell of fresh rain carried through the open windows. I found myself waking earlier, drawn to the sound of the city stretching awake. Life felt lighter now. The weight that used to sit in my chest had turned into something softer, something like peace. One morning, I sat by the window with my coffee and ledger, though I hadn't written anything in it for weeks. The last page still read the same words I'd written months ago. Love is not debt. It's investment. I smiled, closing the book. The numbers didn't matter anymore. What I'd gained wasn't something that could be counted. Across the street, my daughter's building, her building now, was being painted. She'd finally taken over ownership a few weeks earlier. The new color was a pale yellow, bright enough to make the whole block look alive again. The tenants had been stopping by to thank her. I'd seen it from my window, her laughing, clipboard in hand, confident in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. That afternoon, she stopped by with the kids. The youngest held a small plant in a chipped blue pot. "It's for you, Grandma," he said proudly. "Mom said it's called peace lily." I crouched down to take it from him, the soil still damp. "A peace lily," I repeated, smiling. "Fitting name." "We're going to the park," my daughter said. "It's the first warm day in forever. Come with us?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Let me grab my sweater." At the park, the grass was just starting to show green again beneath the winter's wear. The children ran ahead, chasing each other, their laughter echoing between the trees. My daughter and I sat on a bench under the old maple, the same one I used to visit alone. For a long time, we just watched the children play. Then she said, "You know, I still think about that night. The one when I told you to leave. I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for it." I looked at her, the sunlight soft on her face. "You don't have to," I said. "Some things don't need forgiving. They just need to be lived through." She turned toward me, eyes glistening. "You really believe that?" "I do," I said, "because I lived through it and I'm still here." We sat in silence again, the breeze carrying the faint sound of wind chimes from a nearby house. The air smelled like cut grass and possibility. "I never told you," she said after a while, "but the night you moved out, I cried in the kitchen for hours. Jake told me I did the right thing, but deep down, I knew I'd made the biggest mistake of my life." "I knew you'd figure it out someday," I said. "That's what mothers do. They wait for someday." She smiled sadly. "And you did." I nodded. It was worth it. When the children came running back, out of breath and pink-cheeked, they begged for ice cream. We walked together to the small cart by the fountain. The man there recognized me. "Still like chocolate, ma'am?" he asked, and I laughed. Some things never changed. We sat on the grass, dripping cones and sticky fingers everywhere. My daughter leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. "I used to think you were the strongest person I knew," she said quietly. "I'm not," I replied. "I just learned not to break where people expect me to." She smiled, eyes closed, her voice soft. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," I said, "but it gets easier when you stop trying to prove you were right." The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in orange and pink. The air cooled, and the children started gathering dandelions, making wishes as they blew the seeds away. My daughter turned to me and said, "What did you wish for?" "I don't need to wish anymore," I said. "I already got what I wanted." That evening, back at my apartment, I placed the peace lily on the windowsill. The last light of day touched its leaves, making them glow faintly. I looked out at the building across the street, the windows bright, the laughter drifting faintly through the open glass. On my table sat Harold's photo, the one I'd kept all these years. I picked it up and smiled at the familiar face. "You'd like what she's done with the place," I whispered. "You'd like who she's become." I turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft light from the window to fill the room. The city hummed outside, gentle and alive. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet hold me. There was no bitterness left, no sharp edge of loss, just the steady rhythm of a heart that had finally learned its own worth. Everything had come full circle. Before I went to bed, I looked once more at the peace lily, its white bloom beginning to open. "You were right, Harold," I said softly. "Everything does circle back to love." And for the first time in years, I fell asleep smiling, knowing that every wound, every silence, every lonely night had led here, to this calm, this forgiveness, this home.